Welcome to another episode of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today we're going to be talking with Kelli Thompson about busting salary negotiation myths. So welcome, Kelli. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I'm ready to talk about some money.
Absolutely. One of my favorite topics. And definitely salary negotiations is a question I get a lot. And for our audience, for those of you who don't know Kelli, she's a keynote speaker, a writer, an award-winning leadership coach. She's been featured in high-profile issues like Forbes and MarketWatch and HuffPost, Parents and beyond. And her newly released book, Closing the Confidence Gap, super important subject. And it's been called a clearly and forcefully written strategy manual for upping one's professional game. So that's quite a nice review. And it was also chosen as a Next Big Idea Club nominee. So why don't we jump in? Kelli, tell us, how did you come to do this work?
Yeah, so I came to do this work because, I actually am a corporate veteran. And I was in banking for about 14 years. And I remember when I got my first job offer into banking, it was a little bit more money than I was making before. So I just said yes. And I just didn't think about negotiating. But when I got into my career, I was in sales, and then I was a sales trainer, and then kind of doing leadership development training. And then I got into human resources.
Yeah.
And in human resources, we started talking a lot about money because I was doing recruiting. And then eventually I moved on to another firm in which I was leading HR. And so we were always talking about money. And I always just thought it was really interesting because when I initially went to college, I was a meteorology major. I wanted to be a weather girl. And here I am as an HR person.
You got the looks.
I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm like, well, how did I go from the easiest thing to talk about, which is the weather, to a career, which is the hardest thing to talk about, which is money? And so as I was in this career, I started to notice some trends. I started to notice that men typically had higher starting salaries. And there is some, obviously, gender wage gap data to support that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I started to notice was that men just had an easier time negotiating. It was just kind of part of what they did in the job, application process. And when they would negotiate for more. And lots of times women wouldn't negotiate, or they would come to me and say, maybe I should ask for a lower starting salary since I don't meet all the requirements. And I just saw myths across the board, but I also saw from my own human resource lens, just gender-based differences in asking and talking about money. And I was fascinated by this. And so now when I left corporate America in 2019 and I'm doing, leadership and career coaching for women, money is a topic that we talk about because I think there just are some different messages that women have carried about money. I know I've carried them. And so that kind of brings us to where we're at today.
Okay, I love that. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. And thank you for sharing so transparently about that, because it is true. Most women take the salary that's offered to them and they do not negotiate for it. And, studies show that 62% of men will ask for more than they're offered as a first salary, as compared to only 7% of women. I mean, that's a staggering difference. So I'd love you to chat a little bit about the gender differences that you've seen and how men and women negotiate or don't negotiate for salary increases, or generally.
Yeah, let me talk about both sides. So one of the things that I started to notice, kind of like I said earlier, when I was making a job offer to a man, let me even back up. As an HR person, this is a public service announcement.
Yeah.
We talk about money all day long. It is literally like talking about the weather for us. So just know that when we are making you a job offer, we are prepared for you to negotiate, because for us, it's like, all right, I got to make 5 job offers today and I know they're going to negotiate. So just know that on the other end for us, we're waiting. And I would just notice that men were just more forceful about negotiating. Hey, I noticed it's posted at this, but I'm really looking at that.
Yeah.
With women, it just was such a more hesitant topic. They would kind of back into it. So, what's the range? And here's what I'm making. But, if that doesn't fit, there was always a qualifier sometimes at the end. But if that's not in range, let me know. I might take a little bit less. Just the directness in terms of when the money conversation would happen. Men would tend to have it much sooner. Women would have it at the end. And kind of that tentativeness was also something else I saw. And I think that just validates a lot of the data. And, one of the things that I really want women to think about is this, is when you do not negotiate that first salary, just like I didn't.
Yes.
And you are at that organization for a long time. Many bigger organizations have these silly rules about how You could only get certain percent of raises every year,
Yeah.
or even if you switch jobs inside the organization, they have like a 15% cap in which they'll bump your salary. And my point is, if you are an organization for a long time, because you didn't negotiate that first salary, it is then keeping you a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. Like it impacts all of your future salary raises
Yes.
after that. And
Yeah.
two, if your company offers a 401k, that also means you're getting less
Yep.
free matching money than your male counterpart. And that impacts you in retirement. And with compound interest, it ends up being a significant number. In some cases, like $500,000.
Yeah.
Is what stats have said.
So incredible. And I'm so glad you raised that. And I want to put a pin for our audience in two things that you said that I think are super important. I love the public service announcement, by the way.
Yeah.
So good, Kelly. And I want to really hit that point. There is a lifetime cost when you start not asking for what you deserve at the front end, whether you don't negotiate at all or you negotiate for less. The compound effect of that over the course of your career is astronomical for most people. So really listen to Kelly's sort of public service announcement, go ready to negotiate. And the other thing was, that really touched a chord with me when you said that women are more likely to go, oh, maybe I should ask for less because I don't really have all of the qualifications. It's amazing to me, the stats on that as well. Women with 80% of the qualifications for a job are less likely to even apply for the job than men with a fraction of those qualifications. So get out there, put on your big girl pants and get bold about stepping up into your power. And I'd love, if you don't mind, Kelly, talk a little bit about, what do you see as some of the root causes for this difference in the approach between men and women? Because there definitely tend to be gender differences.
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how this practically shows up. So when I was, in an HR role, a man would maybe see the job posted and he'd be like, that job looks awesome. Who do I got to talk to?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is going to get to the whole messages thing.
Yeah.
A woman would reach out to me and be like, oh my gosh, I saw the job, the VP job on the posting board, Kelly. Oh my God, I would love this job. This is my dream job. But you know what? I went through the qualifications and there's one I don't have. Do you think I need to go back to school for this? And I'm like, no. And I can just tell you, like, as an HR person and as a hiring manager, I have hired so many people who didn't meet every single qualification, because here's a dirty little secret, public service announcement number 2. When we're making these job descriptions, we are sitting down with the hiring manager going, what is the best case scenario?
Yeah.
Like if all of our wishes came true, what would this person have? And again, there's things that we have to do for fairness, et cetera. But I know so many people, including myself, who have hired people who were so outstanding that, we're like, it doesn't matter that they only meet like 2 of the core requirements because we need this person. So remember that. And I think a lot of it comes from a lot of the messages that we've been taught. Growing up, culturally, it tends to lean that men are already involved in more money conversations because, again, we live in kind of a patriarchal society. It was created by men for men when men were all in government. And in organizations, that's just the way it is. And so from an earlier age, men are having conversations about providing, about money, about earning. And women are often told messages like, you should just be grateful for what you have. It's rude to ask. That's very generous of them. Are you sure you want to push their buttons? And so there's just some gender differences. Every culture and family is different. But I really see sometimes a lot of these long-standing messages, and it may not have even been told to you. It could have just been modeled in your family that maybe, a female caregiver was just less involved in money talk and bills and such. And maybe a male caregiver was more involved.
Oh, so good. And I mean, it's no wonder we have money baggage, right? It wasn't that long ago in history, women couldn't hold credit in their own name. They couldn't have property in their own name. And, it starts so young, that conditioning you're talking about, Kelly, like as early as kindergarten. Young boys get their social status by making themselves larger than life. The more they do that, the more their social status increases. And for young girls as early as kindergarten, the opposite is true. They start recognizing really early that there's a high cost to stepping into the full force of your power. So we shrink, we make ourselves smaller. So I love this conversation. And before we dive into the myths, which I really want to get to, I love that, because those myths hold us back from getting what we deserve. I'd love if you could share your thoughts more generally on, like, why is it important to negotiate for our salary and working conditions and beyond?
Yeah. One of the reasons I think why it's so important is there is actually a lot of research that when women find out that they are underpaid, that there are significant mental health consequences. From a coaching standpoint,
Yeah.
I can think of 3 of my clients in my mind right now who are experiencing a little bit of resentment and some resulting burnout because they have learned or they know, because they're one of the only women in the executive
Yeah.
team, that they're making a little less.
Yeah.
And in fact, their title even reflects that, even though they're doing the same work as all their male counterparts.
Absolutely.
But this conversation is bigger than that because one, there still is a gender pay gap in which women tend to make around 80 cents on the dollar. That's white women. Of course, for Black and Hispanic women, it's much less.
Yeah.
And, that obviously impacts like a woman's ability to provide for her family and her community.
Yeah.
It's research also shows that when women make more money, they tend to reinvest it into their families and their communities.
Yes.
And I talk about that a lot in my book about how it's so important. But I think that this conversation is also important because we're not just talking about salary and then retirement. I mean, that's kind of what we talked about so far.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I also talk about with women in the book is that there's actually 5 conversations you should be having. You should be talking about the systems at work, the systems of equal pay, talking about your salary, which we talked about, but also talking about like, your self-talk a little bit.
Yes.
Talking about your savings. Women, my husband's a financial advisor and he loves to joke around with his clients that there's actual data that women are better investors than men.
Yeah.
But lots of times women are scared to talk about money.
Yeah.
But when they do better. So, I mean, there's also some long-term, consequences in that. But the final thing I really think is impacted from the money talk is support.
Yeah.
So we have, a gap also in leadership. And when women are promoted, there is data that shows that they often receive less post-promotion support than men.
Yeah.
And post-promotion support could look like a coach.
Yeah.
That's how I work with a lot of women. Leadership training, mentorship, that sort of thing. But that's all money too.
Yeah.
So I always tell women sometimes we can ask for money in non-monetary forms, which is asking your organization to pay for training, pay for coaching, pay for mentorship groups, those sorts of things, because those can support you in your career. And as you accelerate, help you attain and remain in higher paying jobs, which, benefits everyone long-term as well.
Yeah. And it's also the cumulative effect. I mean, we've talked about that a bit in terms of it being over the course of the lifetime, the cumulative impact of that, but it's also the opportunities, right? If you make less money, and as women, you're more likely to invest it in your family, you also don't have that liquid cash, that extra liquid cash to be able to, whether it's investing in real estate or making other investments, which then amplifies, which is why that gap, it's not just the pay gap, it's all of the lost opportunities, the ripple effect of that as well. Now, you had talked earlier, you'd mentioned about that it's rude to ask, that we're conditioned. So let's tackle that myth that it's rude to ask. I'd love you to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that is kind of, one of the number one things that I hear is, oh gosh, isn't it kind of rude to, negotiate my salary or ask for that? I heard that as an HR person, and I hear that a lot as a coach. When I'm talking with like a woman who is making a career change, or maybe she's like working to get promoted and she wants to, talk about the salary conversation. And so what we do is we really have to unpack, where did they hear that? Like who taught them that it was rude to ask? Who taught them that it was impolite to ask? And so one of the things I really encourage them to do is, they've built this whole mental model, is I say, actually, what is the opposite of it's rude to ask? And they might say something like, well, it's helpful to ask. Okay, awesome. Can you think of 3 examples in your life where it's, it has been helpful to you or to someone else to ask? And usually they can think of 3 things right away. And I'm like, that's the evidence we want to start building going into these conversations to help us kind of undo some of those mental models we've kept.
Yeah, great exercises. I love those. That's beautiful. And I always call that flipping the script, flip the story that you're telling yourself around it, right? It's so valuable. And, you'd mentioned before about the money. It's not just about the money. I think, so many people only think about the money when they sit down to negotiate, especially around sort of salary compensation. So I'd love, again, dig a little deeper on that. Explain why it's a myth that money is the only negotiated item on the table.
Yeah. And I think that's, because let's just be honest. when you don't talk about money all day long, it's stressful. Okay. So I'm just validating that when
Yeah.
you're going in for this job, you're excited and you want it. I don't want to screw this thing up. And so we get hyper focused on the money conversation. But what I also really encourage, my clients to advocate for is what is everything else around the money that is going to make you feel good about earning the money. So because the flip side to that is the golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
Which is the money is so good, but the environment or the culture of their
Yes.
vacation is so bad that like, honestly, you're miserable. So I tell people, negotiate flex time. If you are, know the organization's kind of philosophy, but if you are working with an organization that has some hybrid or whatever flex work, negotiate the flex time.
Yeah.
In some organizations, you can negotiate the amount of vacation you get. Again, you'll kind of need to ask some questions about the philosophy, but especially if you're coming in with more experience, you can negotiate the vacation. I encourage folks to negotiate things like tuition reimbursement or education support.
Yeah.
So especially those women who I'm coaching that are going into like senior director, VP and higher, I'm like, hey, listen, male executives have had executive coaches since the beginning of time.
Yes.
And you need support. So when you go in, ask, hey, can I get like a $5,000 a year stipend or whatever you need to ask for executive coaching and support?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. I mean, those are just a few of the things that you can really start to think about negotiating that are going to make you feel good and are going to benefit kind of all of this without maybe directly being money.
So good. And I want to really put a pin in that last point you gave, because I think there are those two avenues, right? One is getting training opportunities, like your more traditional sort of make sure that you're getting trained and that you're being sent to effective training, you're getting mentoring, et cetera, within the organization. And I love, because I rarely hear people talk about it, there is nothing wrong. Ask for that personal development, that personal growth, so that you can go hire a coach yourself, somebody who can. No athlete, no great musician, no world changer has ever done so without coaching in place. So don't be afraid to ask that. And even something like titles, right? That negotiate for a title that's going to better position you to get that next promotion or that next opportunity that comes your way. Yeah. So share with us what are some other myths that come up in salary negotiations, and how can you debunk them?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I hear a lot is like, and this is all around the conversation back to where I started. If it's more than what I currently make, then I should just take it and not negotiate. So let me just talk to you about what something has done in state legislatures. So remember, systemically, women and people of color have historically been underpaid. Okay. So remember, if you fit into that category, it could be true that you were already making less than your male counterpart. So let's just imagine then that you live in a state where they still allow you to put your salary history. You're filling out your job application and you're supposed to put in your salary history. Well, as a recruiter, sometimes, and I'll be honest, I live in a state, Nebraska, in which most jobs require salary history. Yeah, wow. Without even knowing it, like our bias could get in and be like, oh, well, you know what? Our budget for this job was like 80 to 120,000. Ooh, but Susie was making 70,000. You know what? I bet she'd take 85. Whereas let's just say hypothetically, a man would come in making 85 and be like, ooh, we're probably going to have to pay him 100 to come over.
Absolutely.
So I want you to start thinking about this. Don't just say yes because it's higher. Yeah. I want you to slow down and I want you to think about, is this offer in alignment with the market pay for this job, for the work that is being done and the area that, I'm living in? And I know I've personally written to our state legislature about removing or banning the ability to ask for salary history, because it does create what we call an anchoring bias, in which, people very innocently will use that anchoring bias to offer a lower salary to people who have traditionally been underpaid. Absolutely. So always negotiate, even if the offer is higher than what you currently make.
Yeah. I love that. And push outside your comfort zone for exactly the reasons that you were saying, right, Kelli? Because I think that unconscious gender bias impacts, how we perform, how we show up, what our expectations are on so many levels. We're not conscious of it. And I really like that you mentioned that the HR person dealing with you is suffering from all kinds of unconscious gender biases and other anchoring biases that are going to adversely impact on you. So what are some of your other top myth busters? I know you've got a list of them. So I think
we get a couple more we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah. Go ahead. What else do we got?
Yeah. Then the one I hear a lot too is that I shouldn't talk about money and benefits until the end.
Yeah.
And no. Like, let me just kind of tell you.
Yeah.
So my philosophy as an HR person was fail fast, because let's just like lay this out, universal truth. Applying for jobs is time consuming.
Yeah.
Anybody who's been through a job search knows this.
Yeah.
They're like, I got to take personality tests and
Yeah.
screening interviews and all this. It takes time. It takes time on the HR person's part. So
Yeah.
my mindset is let's have some like conversations up front that are going to reveal some non-negotiables, because you know what, let's say I'm interviewing you, Cindy, and your non-negotiable is I need 150,000 for this job. And my very, very top number is 125.
Yeah.
I will say, I wish you all the best of luck,
Yeah.
but there's just not going to be a world in which this
Yeah.
is going to get close. So let's not go down the path and then talk about at the end.
Yeah.
If somebody asked me once, well, how soon should we talk about the money? And it's put it in the posting. A lot of states have, had salary transparency laws. And I think that that's a really great way to let's just talk about it first. Let's talk about the money. Let's talk about the benefits. And that way we're wasting no one's time.
Yeah. So good. And get over the fear and the baggage around that, right? I mean, ultimately we take jobs to make the money.
Yeah.
Yes, satisfaction, and yes, mission driven and purpose and passion, but ultimately you need to get paid. So get that baby pinned down. Now, do you have like a signature model for salary negotiations, or like what would be some of your top tips? I mean, you've shared a lot of fabulous sort of public service announcements, but what would be some of your top tips for, people going into these negotiations?
Yeah. So as I'm talking about this, and I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes, you can even go to my website at kellyraythompson.com and click the little free button, and you're going to see my salary negotiation guide. And I give you all my tips for free. So I'm just going to walk through them at the high level. First thing we're going to do when you're going into a salary negotiation is we're going to do our research. There's so many great websites out there now, between salary.com, LinkedIn now with all the job postings that have salary data. Opencomp.com is a great new startup that has an equal pay calculator. It's really fun. And then of course your state Bureau of Labor Statistics, their wage estimate websites will give you some good government reported data. So do your research. Don't just match the title, but match the work that you're doing, and make sure that you're looking in your city. So like in Omaha, Nebraska, I hate to break it to y'all, where I live, they are not going to pay you the same as San Jose, California.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, let's just level set and bring in some good market data. So the first one is do your research. That's step number one. Step number two that I walk you through is own your skills and talents.
Yes.
Like, do a review of yourself. Like, what have I contributed to in my current organization that will, help me negotiate internally, or, justify, ask externally? What are my top 3 accomplishments, and what did those accomplishments do for the organization?
Exactly.
Really communicating, the benefit that you bring. And, that'll help with a little bit of doubt, and those imposter feelings is really just to own what you've brought. So do your research, own your talents. Step number 3 is practice your ask. Okay. So write it out, practice with your pet, practice on your iPhone, practice with your partner or a friend in front of the mirror. But, really start to think about practicing. And as you're practicing, I want you to think about let's say if you're negotiating internally with your leader, how would my leader best hear this? Yeah. Is my leader the type of person who wants to get an email first so he or she can digest it? Or is my leader the type of person that just wants to hash everything out in person? Step number 4 then is make your ask. Yeah. So prep your ask, own your talents and skills, practice your ask, make your ask. And if I had a tip, like 4.5, when you make your ask, shut up. Yeah. I hear so many, I say that with all the love in my heart. I see so many people going, I believe that a fair rate for this role based on my skills, talents, and experience and what I've seen in market is $150,000. Silence.
Absolutely.
I see so many people go, but if that's like not in range, then maybe we can talk about something else. Do not disqualify, just make your ask. Yes. Allow that person to have the dignity of processing what you just said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Silence is golden for a reason. Mm-hmm. It's so true. And so undervalued. We tend to be very uncomfortable in silences, especially North America as a society. So really, and I love that you talked about that practice piece as well, because you got to get comfortable saying that number. The first time you throw that number out there cannot be in the negotiation. So I want to really put a pin in that. Practice, practice, practice with friends, practice in front of the mirror. Get so comfortable saying that number that there's no hesitation, no uncertainty. You can say it with absolute confidence. I love that. And owning your value. You know, I have my clients do, I call it a brag list, right? Like list all of the qualities that you bring to the table, past accomplishment, present accomplishments, you know, your future capacity, all of that, and relate it back to them. I think such great tip list. I love that. And we'll make sure to put in the show notes for everybody as well. So you can grab that link to go grab that, download a copy of those tips as well. And what role do you think creativity plays in negotiating best outcomes?
Ooh, that's a really good question. You know, I think creativity is the ability to design something that your ideal user will enjoy.
Yeah, nice.
And so when I think about creativity in a salary ask, it's how am I crafting an ask in a way that my end user will hear me?
Yeah.
And so here's just a quick little tip. Okay, so you're prepping your ask, and I have some scripts to get you started in that guide because I know scripts are helpful, but here's what I want you to think about. So let's just say you, Cindy, are my manager, and I'm sitting down and I'm going to ask you for a $20,000 raise because, my role has grown, my title has grown, I have a lot of accomplishments and I'm prepping all this out. I want to stop and ask myself, knowing what I know about Cindy, what are 3 words that describe how I want Cindy to feel in this conversation?
I love that.
I want Cindy to feel, curious about, the data. I want her to feel, informed. Maybe I want her to feel empowered. Like I've given her enough information that she could actually just take everything I gave her and go to HR and be like, this is a no-brainer, people. So I think that's a really helpful way that you can use creativity to design this conversation in a way that your end user will hear it best. And that is just sitting down and asking yourself, how do I want this person to feel? And when you have that, bring that energy into that conversation and kind of design your script in a way that, really meets that need.
I really like that, Kelly. It's funny. I sort of do a flip of that, but I really love that. I think because I often tell my clients, choose 3 words that represent how you want to show up, how you want to be seen by them, right? Is it calm, collected, confident, bold, courageous? Well, there's no right or wrong answer, but be intentional. But I love that other piece as well. How do I want them to feel? Because ultimately in salary negotiations, you're going to be more effective if you make it about them, what you can do for the organization, how you can benefit them. They're going to love to know what all your skills are, but tying it back. So that was a beautiful little add-on there. And I can't believe how quick our time has gone. You are like just jam-packed loaded with it. You like me, you talk fast, and boy, did you give value for our listeners. I so appreciate that. And one of the greatest, I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be on this issue, but one of those moments where it's like, it changes how you think or show up.
It wasn't necessarily a mindset shift as much as it was a body shift. The biggest mindset shift I've ever had was when I went through a really difficult point in my life in about 2016. Where I was in a kind of a big career crossroads due to a buyout and a merger and all the things. And I was 3 months out from getting married and I had to call off the wedding. I mean, it was not my brightest shining moment in life. And I think one of the things that was really an aha to me is like, I really got into this trouble because number 1, I wasn't clear on what I stood for in my life and what my values were. And number 2, I never trusted my gut. I would have gut feelings and intuitive feelings, but what would happen is my mind would jump in and be like, oh, don't do that. Oh, it looks good on paper. Oh, they're going to hurt their feelings, whatever. So my biggest mindset shift was like defining what I stood for and allowing my gut to tell me heck yes or hell no. And just trusting that and not coming in and constantly overwriting it with my brain, trying to justify or make excuses. And that has been the biggest transformational moment in it's changed everything in my life, is the ability to recognize, Kelly, your body is trustworthy.
Yeah.
And
That is such a great reminder, right? Like I'm a big believer in sort of some of the models that I use for negotiation, and intuition is one of those key things. And I think we used to, as women in particular, they call it women's intuition for a reason, but somewhere along the line, we lost our trust in that. So I think that's such a beautiful reminder. Well, Kelly, tell us where people can learn more about you. I know you've given one site there. If you want to give that again, and we'll make sure to put it in the show notes. So how can people get in touch with you to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, the great place to stop is kellyraythompson.com, and I'm Kelly with an I, R-A-E. And then you will find my little free tab with all the salary negotiation guide downloads. But I love to hang out on Instagram and LinkedIn. And so if you have questions or something resonated with you, I'd love to get a note from you. I will respond.
Yeah.
And you can find me on those platforms at /Kelli Ray Thompson.
So good. And again, we'll make sure to put those in the show notes. And remember, that's Kelli with an I, Thompson with a P.
Yep.
So that you make sure to get that right. Well, thanks so much for being Kelli. You have dropped such value for our listeners. I appreciate that. Sometimes people come and they're so busy sort of selling what they do that they don't actually give practical, concrete takeaways. And you have given us so many in spades. So thanks so much for sharing your insights with us here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for talking about money with me.
Yeah. And for our listeners, if you did not get loads of value from this episode, then you just weren't listening. So I encourage you, go back, make sure to share it, give the gift of sharing as well. This is talking about money is an issue that's very difficult, as Kelli's pointed out, for so many people. So really share this episode. I think there's really important messaging here for all of you. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that. And before we sign off today, just to share a few ways that we can work together. If you're looking to up level your negotiation skills so you can negotiate a better life for yourself, I've got everything from one-on-one mastermind and VIP experiences all the way down to some online if you're looking for some quick and dirty. So if you're looking to better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com if that sounds interesting to you. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.